Welcome to Sci-Fi Stories Beyond, where we write the best HFY full sci-fi stories in the known universe. Today's sci-fi story is named The Labyrinth of Doom. In a twisted alien game show, Corporal Nathan Holland must navigate a deadly labyrinth filled with traps, monsters, and treacherous allies to uncover a sinister conspiracy threatening the galaxy. As he battles for survival and grapples with his own doubts and growing feelings, Nathan's journey will test the limits of his courage and humanity in a pulse-pounding story of betrayal, mystery, and the fight for truth in a galaxy consumed by conflict. Let's lock and load. The stench of fear and desperation hung thick in the air as I stepped into the arena, the thunderous roar of the bloodthirsty Florian crowd assaulting my ears. My name is Corporal Nathan Holland, and I had been trained to face the horrors of war, but nothing could have prepared me for this twisted alien game show, The Labyrinth of Doom. Just days ago, I was serving alongside my squad in the Earth Defense Force, fighting to protect humanity's interests in the far reaches of the galaxy. We thought we were the good guys, the righteous defenders of our species, but as I stood in the bowels of this cruel alien labyrinth, I couldn't shake the gnawing doubt that had plagued me for so long. Were we truly on the right side of this galactic conflict? My thoughts were abruptly shattered by the grating voice of the Florian announcer, his words dripping with sadistic glee. Welcome, contestants, to the Labyrinth of Doom. You have been chosen to fight for the glory of the Florian Empire and the entertainment of our esteemed viewers. Fall with pride for the Florian faction. I scanned the faces of my fellow contestants, a motley crew of alien species from across the galaxy. There was ZYX, a fierce insectoid warrior with glistening mandibles and a hardened exoskeleton. Beside her stood Eldra, a graceful plant-like creature with shimmering, iridescent foliage and piercing amber eyes. And then there was Talon, a hulking Florian soldier who had turned against his own kind, his scarred face etched with a permanent scowl. As the starting buzzer blared, we were thrust into the nightmarish depths of the labyrinth. The walls seemed to pulse with a sickening, organic rhythm, as if the structure itself were alive and hungry for our suffering. Holographic projections flickered to life, transforming the corridors into a hellish dreamscape of twisted alien landscapes and grotesque creatures. I gripped my weapon tightly, a sleek plasma rifle that felt both comfortingly familiar and woefully inadequate against the horrors that awaited us. ZYX scuttled ahead, her keen senses alert for any sign of danger. Eldra glided gracefully beside me, her telepathic abilities reaching out to probe the minds of our unseen adversaries. Suddenly, a bone-chilling screech echoed through the labyrinth, and a horde of nightmarish beasts descended upon us. Their misshapen bodies were a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, with razor-sharp claws and dripping, acid-filled moss. I opened fire, my plasma rounds tearing through their ranks, but for every monstrosity I felled, two more seemed to take its place. Beside me, ZYX danced a deadly ballet, her chitinous blades slicing through the creatures with terrifying precision. Eldra's mental blasts sent the beasts reeling, their minds shattered by her psychic assault. And Talon, the renegade Florian, fought with the fury of a man possessed, his massive fists crushing the skulls of our attackers. As the last of the creatures fell, we paused to catch our breath, our armor splattered with the viscous ichor of our fallen foes. But there was no time to rest, no respite from the unrelenting brutality of the labyrinth. We pressed on, deeper into the bowels of this hellish construct, each step taking us further from the world we once knew. Hours turned into days as we navigated the treacherous corridors, facing an endless onslaught of deadly traps and vicious alien monstrosities. The Florian oligarchs had spared no expense in crafting this sadistic game, employing their most advanced technologies to create a spectacle of suffering and death. In the fleeting moments of calm between battles, I found myself drawn to Eldra. Her gentle touch and soothing telepathic presence were a balm to my battered soul. We spoke of our hopes and fears, of the lives we had left behind and the uncertain future that lay ahead. I couldn't deny the growing connection between us, the unspoken bond forged in the crucible of this hellish arena. But even as I allowed myself to find solace in Eldra's companionship, I wrestled with the harsh reality of our situation. Every moment of tenderness was tinged with the knowledge that death lurked around every corner, ready to snatch away what little comfort we had found. The labyrinth demanded a ruthless calculus of survival, and I feared that any attachment would only make the inevitable losses more devastating. As we delved ever deeper into the maze, the challenges grew more daunting, the horrors more unspeakable. We fought against towering mechanized colossi, their metal bodies impervious to our weapons. We faced swarms of venomous insectoid drones that threatened to overwhelm us with their sheer numbers. And always, the watchful eyes of the Florian audience bore down upon us, their holographic visages leering and taunting as we struggled to survive. Through it all, Talon remained a stoic and formidable presence, his knowledge of Florian tactics and technology proving invaluable. But beneath his gruff exterior, I sensed a deep well of pain and anger, a burning desire for vengeance against the society that had created him and then cast him aside. It was during one of our most desperate battles, as we found ourselves cornered by a pack of genetically engineered predators, that Talon's true nature was revealed. With a fierce battle cry, he charged into the fray, drawing the creature's attention away from ZYX, Eldra, and myself. His massive frame was a blur of motion as he grappled with the beasts, his armor painted with their blood and his own. But even Talon's prodigious strength and skill were not enough to overcome the relentless onslaught. As he fought to buy us time to escape, one of the predators latched onto his arm, its jaws clamping down with sickening force. Talon roared in pain and fury, but refused to yield, using his free hand to unsheath a crackling plasma blade and plunge it into the creature's skull. In that moment, I saw the true measure of Talon's character, not the bitterness and resentment that had driven him to betray his own people, but the selfless courage and loyalty that compelled him to lay down his life for his comrades. With a final, defiant roar, Talon charged into the heart of the predator pack, his plasma blade flashing as he hacked and slashed with the fury of a man who knew his end had come. ZYX, Eldra, and I could only watch in stunned silence as Talon disappeared beneath the writhing mass of fangs and claws, his life sacrificed so that we might live another day. The weight of his loss settled upon us like a leaden shroud, a grim reminder of the price we might all be called to pay before this nightmare was over. As we retreated to a momentary safe haven, I couldn't help but reflect on the grim calculus of survival that the labyrinth demanded. How many more friends and allies would we be forced to leave behind, their lives spent in the service of this cruel alien spectacle? The thought filled me with a cold, simmering rage, a determination to find some way to break free of this hell and make the Florians pay for their crimes. But even as I nursed my anger and grief, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of doubt that gnawed at the edges of my mind. The Florians' technology was so advanced, their control over the labyrinth so complete. What hope did we really have of escape or victory? And even if we did somehow manage to survive and expose the truth of this twisted game, would it be enough to change the course of the galactic conflict that raged beyond these walls? These were the thoughts that haunted me as we pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth's cruel embrace. With each passing hour, the challenges grew more daunting, the horrors more unspeakable, but through it all, the bonds between ZYX, Eldra, and myself only grew stronger, tempered by the fires of shared hardship and loss. We clung to each other like drowning sailors in a storm-tossed sea, knowing that in this hellish arena, our only hope lay in standing together against the darkness. And so we fought on, driven by equal parts desperation and defiance, determined to either find a way out of this nightmare or die trying. But even as we struggled to survive, I couldn't shake the feeling that our true challenge still lay ahead. For in the twisted depths of the labyrinth, a secret that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the Florian Empire, and my own place in this galactic conflict, a secret that would test the limits of my courage, my loyalty, and my very humanity, a secret that could only be revealed in the crucible of the labyrinth's darkest heart. Arc 2, Shadows of the Mind. As we delved deeper into the labyrinth, the weight of Talon's sacrifice hung heavy on our hearts. The grim reality of our situation had been laid bare, and we knew that any one of us could be the next to fall. But even in the midst of our grief and despair, we had no choice but to press on, driven by the desperate hope that somewhere in this twisted maze lay the key to our salvation. Days blurred into weeks as we navigated the labyrinth's ever-shifting corridors, facing an endless parade of nightmarish horrors and deadly traps. The Florian oligarchs seemed to take a perverse delight in watching us suffer, their holographic visages leering down at us from every angle, taunting us with the promise of freedom that always remained just out of reach. But even as we struggled to survive the physical challenges of the labyrinth, a new threat began to emerge, one that struck at the very heart of our minds and souls. It started with subtle changes in the environment around us, the walls and floors of the maze shifting and warping in ways that defied explanation. At first, we dismissed it as just another trick of the Florians' advanced technology, but as time wore on, the changes became more pronounced, more unsettling. Eldra was the first to sense that something was truly amiss. Her telepathic abilities had always given her a unique insight into the world around us, but now she spoke of a growing darkness that lurked at the edges of her perception, a malevolent presence that seemed to be reaching out to twist and manipulate our thoughts and emotions. At first, I was skeptical of her warnings, my mind still reeling from the loss of Talon and the constant stress of survival. But as the days passed, I began to feel it too, a creeping sense of unease that slowly gave way to paranoia and despair. It was as if the very air we breathed was tainted with a poison that seeped into our minds, corrupting our thoughts and eroding our will to resist. ZYX, too, seemed to be struggling with the effects of this insidious mental assault. The fierce insectoid warrior who had once been a pillar of strength and determination now moved with a listless, almost mechanical gait, her compound eyes glazed and unfocused. When she spoke, her words were flat and lifeless, as if all the fire had been drained from her soul. As the leader of our little band of survivors, I knew that I had to find a way to keep us together, to rally our flagging spirits and find a way to resist the Florians' mind games. But with each passing day, the task seemed more and more insurmountable. The labyrinth itself seemed to be actively working against us now, its twisting corridors and nightmarish illusions blurring the lines between reality and madness. It was Eldra who finally gave us our first glimmer of hope. In a moment of desperate inspiration, she reached out with her telepathic abilities, not to probe the minds of our enemies, but to forge a deeper connection between ZYX, herself, and me. It was a risky gambit, one that left her mind vulnerable to the same dark forces that sought to tear us apart, but it was the only way to create a bulwark against the Florians' insidious influence. As our minds touched, I felt a surge of energy and clarity that I hadn't known in weeks. Suddenly, the fog of despair and paranoia that had clouded my thoughts began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and determination. I could see now that the Florians' manipulation went far beyond mere physical torture and psychological warfare. They were using advanced neurological technology to directly interface with our minds, seeking to break our wills and turn us into obedient puppets. But with Eldra's help, we had a chance to fight back. By pooling our mental strength and focusing our willpower, we could create a psychic shield that would protect us from the worst of the Florians' mind games. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it required constant effort and concentration to maintain, but it was a start. As we pressed on, buoyed by this newfound sense of unity and resilience, we began to notice other changes in the labyrinth around us. The holographic projections that had once been a constant source of terror and confusion now seemed to flicker and glitch, as if the Florians' control over the environment was beginning to fray at the edges. It was then that ZYX made a startling revelation. In a moment of quiet reflection, she confided that she had been working on a secret project, one that could potentially give us a way out of this nightmare. Using her knowledge of Florian technology and her own innate hacking abilities, she had been covertly probing the labyrinth systems, searching for weaknesses and vulnerabilities that we could exploit. But even as she spoke of this glimmer of hope, ZYX's voice was tinged with a grim determination that bordered on obsession. She spoke of the destruction of her own people at the hands of the Florians, of the burning desire for revenge that had consumed her for so long. It was clear that, for her, escape from the labyrinth was not enough. She wanted to see the Florian Empire burn, to make them suffer as she had suffered. I couldn't help but feel a pang of unease at the intensity of ZYX's words. I understood her pain and her anger, but I also knew that revenge was a dangerous path, one that could easily lead us astray from our true goal of survival and freedom. We had already lost so much in this nightmare: our friends, our innocence, our very sense of self. I feared that if we allowed ourselves to be consumed by hatred and vengeance, we would lose what little humanity we had left. But even as I grappled with these doubts, I knew that ZYX's plan represented our best chance at escape, and so, with a heavy heart and a grim determination, I made the decision to trust in her abilities, to put our fate in the hands of a being driven by a thirst for retribution. As we set to work, following ZYX's lead as she probed and prodded at the labyrinth systems, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a precipice, staring down into an abyss of uncertainty and danger. We had already come so far, endured so much, but I knew that the true test of our strength and our humanity still lay ahead. For in the deepest, darkest reaches of the labyrinth, a secret waited to be uncovered, a truth that would shatter everything we thought we knew about the Florian Empire and our place in this galactic nightmare, a truth that could either be our salvation or our ultimate undoing. But whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: we would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of suffering and survival. For in the end, that was all we had left: each other, and the desperate, defiant hope that somehow, against all odds, we would find a way to triumph over the darkness that sought to consume us all. With ZYX's newfound knowledge of the labyrinth systems, we finally had a glimmer of hope in our desperate struggle for survival. But even as we threw ourselves into the task of unraveling the Florians' technological secrets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against time, that every moment we spent in this hellish maze brought us closer to some final, terrible reckoning. As ZYX worked tirelessly to probe the labyrinth's defenses, Eldra and I focused on keeping our little group together, both physically and mentally. We knew that the Florians' mind games would only intensify as we drew closer to the heart of their power, and we would need every ounce of strength and unity to resist their insidious influence. But even as we fought to maintain our fragile alliance, I found myself increasingly drawn to Eldra, to the gentle strength and quiet wisdom that seemed to radiate from her like a beacon in the darkness. In the fleeting moments of peace between battles, we would often sit together, sharing stories of our past lives and the dreams we still clung to, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was during one of these moments of connection that Eldra finally revealed the true depth of her feelings for me. With a trembling hand, she reached out to brush my cheek, her amber eyes shimmering with a mixture of fear and longing. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant roar of the labyrinth's horrors. "I know this may be the worst possible time, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something for you. Something real, and powerful, and terrifying." I felt my breath catch in my throat, my heart pounding with a sudden, desperate intensity. I had tried so hard to keep my own feelings buried, to focus on the mission and the survival of our group, but in that moment, with Eldra's gentle touch sending shivers down my spine, I knew that I could no longer deny the truth. "I feel it too," I whispered back, my voice hoarse with emotion, "and it scares the hell out of me." For a long moment, we simply held each other, our bodies trembling with a mixture of fear and desire, but even as we clung to this fleeting moment of connection, I knew that we couldn't afford to let our guard down, to lose sight of the terrible reality that surrounded us. With a heavy sigh, I pulled away, my eyes meeting Eldra's with a grim determination. "We have to stay focused," I said softly, hating the words even as I spoke them. "We can't let our feelings cloud our judgment, not when so much is at stake." Eldra nodded, her expression a mirror of my own conflicted emotions. "I know," she said softly, "but promise me one thing, Nathan, promise me that if we make it out of this nightmare, we'll find a way to explore this. Whatever it is between us, that we won't let the darkness win, even if it means risking our hearts." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. "I promise," I whispered, and in that moment, I meant it with every fiber of my being. But even as Eldra and I grappled with our growing feelings for each other, ZYX's work on the labyrinth systems was beginning to bear fruit. With a triumphant shout, she called us over to the makeshift terminal she had rigged up, her compound eyes glinting with a fierce, determined light. "I've found a way into the central control matrix," she said, her voice thrumming with barely contained excitement. "It's not much, but it might just be enough to give us a fighting chance of escape." As ZYX explained her plan, I felt a flicker of hope begin to burn in my chest. It was a desperate gamble, one that would require split-second timing and no small amount of luck, but it was a chance, the first real chance we had since we'd been thrown into this nightmare. The plan was brutally simple. ZYX had discovered a vulnerability in the labyrinth's security systems, a brief window of opportunity when the Florians' control over the environment would be at its weakest. If we could time our escape attempt to coincide with this moment of vulnerability, we might just be able to slip through the cracks and make a break for freedom. But even as we began to lay our plans, a new revelation rocked our fragile alliance to its core. As ZYX probed deeper into the labyrinth systems, she stumbled upon a hidden section of the database, a secret archive that the Florians had gone to great lengths to conceal. In what she found there was enough to make even her battle-hardened shell tremble with shock and rage. The Florians, it seemed, had been using the Labyrinth of Doom for far more than mere entertainment. They had been using it as a testing ground, a brutal crucible in which to identify and abduct individuals with unique abilities from across the galaxy. For years, they had been secretly collecting these specimens, studying their powers and seeking ways to harness them for their own twisted ends. And among the countless files and records that ZYX uncovered, one name stood out like a beacon in the darkness: Captain Alara Voss, a high-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Force who had gone missing years ago, presumed killed in action during a brutal battle with the Florians. But the records showed that Voss had not died on that distant battlefield. She had been captured, subjected to the same brutal trials and experiments as the rest of the Florians' hapless victims. The implications of this revelation sank in. I felt a cold, simmering rage begin to build in the pit of my stomach. The Earth Defense Force had lied to us, had covered up the truth of what had happened to one of their own, and in doing so, they had left Captain Voss to suffer the same fate as the rest of the Florians' playthings, a fate that we ourselves had only narrowly escaped. But even as I grappled with this new betrayal, I knew that we couldn't afford to lose focus, to let our anger and our pain distract us from the task at hand. We had a plan, a way out of this nightmare, and we had to see it through, no matter the cost. And so, with heavy hearts and grim determination, we set our escape attempt into motion. ZYX worked feverishly to exploit the vulnerability she had discovered, her fingers flying over the makeshift terminal as she fought to stay one step ahead of the Florians' defenses. Eldra and I took up positions on either side of the access corridor we had chosen for our escape route, our weapons primed and ready for anything the labyrinth might throw at us. But even as we prepared to make our desperate bid for freedom, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something much larger than ourselves, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the confines of this twisted maze, one that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy in its dark embrace. And as we charged headlong into the unknown, our hearts pounding with equal parts fear and determination, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of love, loyalty, and the desperate, defiant hope that somewhere beyond the darkness, a brighter future awaited us all. Our escape from the labyrinth was a blur of chaos and desperation, a mad scramble through twisting corridors and deadly traps as we fought to stay one step ahead of the Florians' defenses. But somehow, against all odds, We made it, bursting out of the maze and into the harsh, unforgiving light of the Florian homeworld. But even as we collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath and trembling with adrenaline, we knew that our struggle was far from over. We had escaped the labyrinth, but we were still deep in enemy territory, surrounded by a civilization that would stop at nothing to recapture us and drag us back into their twisted games. And so, with a grim determination born of desperation, we set out to unravel the secrets that ZYX had uncovered in the labyrinth's databases, the truth about the Florian's sinister experiments, and the fate of Captain Alara Voss and countless other victims of their cruelty. As we dug deeper into the Florian's records, a picture began to emerge of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the confines of the Labyrinth of Doom. The Florians, it seemed, had been engaged in a secret war against the other races of the galaxy for decades, using their advanced technology and their twisted games to identify and exploit the weaknesses of their enemies. And at the heart of this conspiracy was a shadowy figure known only as the Overseer, a being of immense power and influence who had been pulling the strings of the Florian Empire for longer than anyone could remember. It was the Overseer who had ordered the creation of the Labyrinth of Doom, who had orchestrated the abduction and experimentation on countless innocent beings from across the galaxy. But even as we grappled with the enormity of the Florians' crimes, we knew that we couldn't afford to lose sight of our ultimate goal, to rescue Captain Voss and the other prisoners, and to find a way to expose the truth of the Florians' atrocities to the rest of the galaxy. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, we set out to infiltrate the heart of the Florian Empire itself, the towering spires and gleaming streets of their capital city, where the Overseer and his minions held court. But as we made our way deeper into the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, a creeping sense of unease that grew with every step we took. And then, in a moment of shocking revelation, I finally understood the source of my disquiet. There, waiting for us in the shadows of a deserted alleyway, was a face I had never expected to see again, one of my own squad mates, a man I had thought lost forever in the chaos of our capture by the Florians. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw coldness there, a blank, soulless emptiness that chilled me to the bone. And then, with a voice that was flat and emotionless, he spoke the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my past, my present, and my future. "Nathan," he said, his gaze boring into mine with a terrible intensity, "you have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. The Earth Defense Force, the Florians, the Overseer. They're all connected, and at the center of it all is you." I felt my blood run cold, my mind reeling with the implications of his words. How could I be connected to this nightmare, to the suffering and destruction that the Florians had unleashed upon the galaxy? But even as I struggled to make sense of it all, I knew one thing with a terrible certainty. My squadmate was no longer the man I had once known. He had been broken, his mind and soul shattered by the Florians' cruel machinations. And so, with a heavy heart, I did the only thing I could. I fought, my weapons flashing in the darkness as I struggled to put down the soulless husk that had once been my friend. But even as I emerged victorious, my heart ached with the knowledge of what I had lost, and what I might still have to sacrifice in the battles to come. For I knew now that the truth of my past, and the fate of the galaxy itself, hung in the balance, a terrible secret that could either be our salvation, or our ultimate undoing. And as we pressed on, deeper into the heart of the Florian Empire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing towards a reckoning that would test the very limits of our strength, our courage, and our humanity. But whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: I would not rest until I had uncovered the truth, until I had exposed the Florians' crimes and brought their reign of terror to an end. For in the end, that was all that mattered, the desperate, defiant hope that somehow, against all odds, we could still make a difference, that we could still fight for a brighter future, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. And so, with a grim determination and a heart full of fear and hope, I pressed on, towards the final confrontation that would decide the fate of us all, and the destiny of the entire galaxy. As we stood on the precipice of our final confrontation with the Florian Empire, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we had endured, the battles, the sacrifices, the betrayals, had been leading us to this moment. And yet, even as we prepared to storm the towering spires of the Overseer's citadel, I knew that the greatest revelation of all still awaited us. With ZYX and Eldra by my side, we fought our way through the streets of the Florian capital, our weapons flashing in the neon-lit darkness as we clashed with the Overseer's elite guards. But even as we battled against impossible odds, I couldn't shake the sense that something was guiding us, that some unseen force was pulling us ever closer to the heart of the conspiracy that had consumed our lives. And then, in a moment of blinding clarity, I finally understood. As we burst into the Overseer's inner sanctum, his holographic form looming over us like a malevolent god, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "Welcome home, Nathan," the Overseer said, his voice a twisted mockery of paternal pride. "I've been waiting for you." And then, With a wave of his hand, he conjured up a series of images that shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. In my place in this galactic nightmare, I saw myself as a child, my body broken and my mind shattered by the Florians' cruel experiments. I saw the Earth Defense Force, not as a bastion of hope and justice, but as a pawn in the Overseer's twisted game, a tool to be used and discarded at his whim. And at the center of it all, I saw my father, a man I had never known, a man whose legacy had haunted me all my life. He had been a scientist, a visionary who had sought to harness the power of the galaxy itself, but in his hubris, he had unleashed a nightmare that had consumed him, and everyone he had ever loved. The Overseer was that nightmare, a being of pure malevolence, born from my father's darkest dreams and given form by the Florians' twisted science. And now, at long last, he had come to claim his greatest creation, me. For a moment, I felt myself reeling on the edge of despair, my mind and soul threatening to shatter under the weight of the truth. But then, I felt Eldra's hand in mine, her strength and her love anchoring me in the chaos, and I knew that I was not alone, that I had never been alone. With a roar of defiance, I launched myself at the Overseer, my blade flashing in the darkness as I channeled all of my rage, all of my pain, into a single, devastating strike. And as the Overseer's form shattered into 1,000 glittering shards, I felt a wave of pure, exultant joy wash over me. But even as we stood triumphant, the citadel crumbling around us, I knew that our work was not yet done, for Eldra had one final revelation to share, a secret that she had kept hidden, even from herself, until the very end. I can destroy the Florians' mind control technology, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, but the cost will be my life. For a moment, I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces, the thought of losing her almost more than I could bear, but as I looked into her eyes, I saw love there that transcended life and death, a bond that could never be broken. And so, with a final, desperate kiss, I let her go, watching in awe and heartbreak as she unleashed the full power of her abilities, her form blazing with an incandescent light as she poured her very essence into the Florian systems, tearing them apart from the inside out. In the end, as the dust settled and the last of the Florians lay broken at our feet, I knew that we had won, but the cost had been higher than I ever could have imagined. For a long time, I wandered the galaxy, lost in my grief and my memories, but always, I carried with me the knowledge of what we had achieved, and the sacrifices that had made it possible. And slowly, day by day, I began to heal. I found ZYX again, and together we worked to build a new alliance, one that would stand against the darkness, and fight for the freedom and dignity of all beings. And though the scars of our battle would never fully fade, we knew that we had made a difference, that we had struck a blow for justice that would echo throughout the ages. And as I looked out at the stars, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a feeling of purpose and belonging that I had never known before, for I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what darkness we might face, we would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of love, friendship, and the desperate, defiant hope that had carried us through the worst of times. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a soul alight with the promise of a brighter tomorrow, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, and to fight for the future we had won, with every ounce of strength and courage I possessed. For in the end, that was all that mattered, the knowledge that we had made a difference, that we had fought for something bigger than ourselves. And though the road ahead would be long and hard, I knew that we would walk it together, forever united by the trials we had endured, and the love that had sustained us through it all. If you enjoyed this HFY full sci-fi story, comment 86 in the comments to show you made it to the end and are now among the ranks in the Beyond Corp. Also give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe for more daily Beyond Corp sci-fi stories. Thanks for watching.